We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. We're talking Broken, the I-Team's continuing investigation into juvenile crime, which obviously is a big problem here and across the country. Ben Hall, I-Team, has a piece running tonight. With him also is Wesley Clark, an attorney. He's worked with him on the issue of, it's interesting. We were talking about how many of the stories that Phil has done to this point are about these kids in the revolving door and they keep getting out and committing crimes and all of this. Your story tonight is on the kids who are into the system but are put into isolation. So
right.
This story is not about, well, they shouldn't be locked up. This story is that they should not be put in solitary confinement.
And it is about what happens once they do get into the system. Are they coming out worse off than when they went in? This is an opportunity. And what is it you wanted to say about that?
So in the public's interest, the evidence is clear. There is not an expert in the world who will tell you that it is an effective means of behavioral intervention to place juveniles in solitary confinement for this type of time period, or really at all, except for to protect the child's safety in very limited circumstances or to protect from a illness spreading. So having a uniform policy where children are placed in solitary confinement is simply bad for the public, because the children will come out worse than they came in when we have evidence-based solutions that could be effectively applied while the children are in custody to reduce their likelihood of reoffending.
Seems pretty straightforward. Let's go to Ann. Ann, good morning. Hi, Ann.
Good morning.
Morning.
I've got a comment and then a question. Earlier this year, I had hand surgery, and after 8 weeks of being housebound, I was extremely depressed, and that was just because my situation was limiting. Isolation is way beyond that and is totally ineffective. My question, though, is DCS is not, they have to still continue the educational needs. How do they get around not providing school? How do they keep these children in isolation and not have them doing classwork and participating in educational needs throughout the day, especially when they are housed for weeks on end, because they are still required to provide the educational as well as the health and mental needs of these children?
Good question. I mean, they put them in isolation or secluded like this. Are they also still throughout the day doing some of these things I thought they're mandated to do when they have kids in their custody?
Not according to the reports that we've received about the Maury County facility.
This place is the first place that kids go, and so no, they're not. There's a period of time where they're on room restriction and they're not getting these services. And
just
that's
nothing.
what
They're just sitting in a room.
Yeah, it's dead time, and that's what concerns Davidson County. That's why Davidson County is speaking out about it. This is a place where kids go and then they go on to another place. They're not designed to stay in this place for a long time, but the reality is that sometimes beds don't open up and kids are staying there. They can stay up to 3 months in this facility, and that's the concern. And to that caller's point, she said she had surgery and was alone for some period of time. I mean, imagine it.
No, I can't.
It's a very difficult thing, and many of these kids are away from their families, away from, and they've been through traumatic, terrible situations, like this kid who pulled a gun on his mom's abusive boyfriend.
I'm still trying to figure out why the heck he was in jail for that.
It's a
abusive
gun
boyfriend. Is there self-defense? I'm going to pull a gun on someone if I'm in danger. I don't get it, but I don't know the details of that case.
Right, and that's what I heard. I mean, we don't have, but that's what they say, and so. Yeah, these are traumatic, difficult situations.
What's interesting, and this is, I think, a worthwhile suggestion from Marcel, and I don't know if that's something you guys are looking at, maybe putting together a panel or something if there was some way to hear from some of these kids after they've come out to talk to them. I don't know if you've talked to some of them. I know Phil has to some degree. That would be worth doing, I would think. Have we heard from what some of them say afterwards? I mean, in your dealings with some of them, what have they told you?
I have spoken with many children who have been subjected to solitary confinement, and the reaction is that across the board it's an extremely psychologically oppressive environment. And the boredom the caller describes was probably mitigated by the fact that she had access to television, books, magazines. These kids have access to concrete and a policy manual. So that is very concerning.
Yeah. All right, let's go to Tom. Tom, good morning. Hi, Tom.
Good morning, Nick. How you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm sitting here listening to this guy that's sitting on the end there. I liked what he said about a while ago about the kids going into custody and coming back out in worse shape than they did when they go in. Well, let me just tell you something. My kids was teenagers, and they was at a ball game, and there was some kids trying to sell one of my sons some drugs. So my other son come up and found out about it, and he whooped 2 kids and put them in a hospital, the ones that was trying to sell the drugs. The DHS and them takes my 2 kids, takes them to court, and they put them in a group home. The other kids, drug dealers, whatever, they just let them go. Well, when my kids got back out of the program, you don't even want to fool my kids right now with us. They so angry and so ill at the public and the people, the way they was treated in the facility, the way the department and stuff treated them, misused them, and everything. Now I've got one son, you fool him, he's liable to kill you, just not thinking nothing about it. He's just ill and upset with the system. Yes, when you put children in the system and lock them up like animals, when they come back out, they're going to be like animals. That's all they're going to know, and that's why you need somebody in there to take those kids and talk to them, and sit down with them, and not try to ignore them when they're in these facilities, and work with them.
That's what you're saying, and Tommy's lived it now. So, so I'm trying to just get a handle on why it is this way. You've said it's been this way for a long time, apparently, and now it's coming to the surface. But this solitary has been going on. But I mean, what is the tangible reason? And I'm guessing, once again, it comes down to the money, the supervision, the resources available to do what I think, if you're rational, you understand what we're saying here.
Right.
Releasing them worse off than when they went in is just flat stupid. And if you're just angry and want to lock people up and then deal with it when they come visit you in your house late at night after they get out, that's on you. I don't want to deal with that.
Right.
It's better for everyone to try, since you know they're getting out, we can't lock them up for decades, to get them better off. That's a no-brainer, right? Okay.
So the state
so why is
said,
it not happening?
The state said they were surprised that Davidson County was raising these concerns, and that Davidson County may have unrealistic expectations. Davidson County does have more facilities than some of these other communities, and I guess than this one in Murray County. And so I think the issue does come down to resources, right?
And I would say that it's not just the Department of Children's Services. They're sort of playing the hand they've been dealt by having these facilities constructed in the past and not having adequate resources to address these very real problems. So there is some significant culpability on the part of the Tennessee taxpayer and voter. This is something that, if we want to fix, there are only a couple of ways that can happen, and one is with legislation that would address this issue and provide funding for the department to do the right thing here, and the other way is eventually someone will likely sue over this, and if successful, they'll still have to build new facilities and pay for a class action lawsuit.
Pay the lawsuit. Ben, remember the stories we did at Woodland Hills several years back, and you had these kids running crazy inside the fence. We had the video of them with broom handles, and the poor guards or officials, corrections officers there, under the guidelines, are not allowed to really retaliate, and so they kind of, their hands were tied, and I watched that and saw some of these young hoodlums doing this. Lock them up, man.
Right,
I mean, that's the attitude. But part of the problem there, as I saw that, was that they didn't have the resource. I don't know how those kids all got free. Remember that? It was a crazy morning at Woodland Hills, and
they were running around.
Yeah,
the video was
video, and
incredible.
so that was a problem. So now, I mean, does those kind of conditions still exist now? Because that's where I can understand, if you're letting them out and then they go running amok like that, I can see why they figure, well, look, we have no choice but to lock them up.
So I'm not aware of the current conditions at Woodland Hills, but we are aware that there exist many alternatives that work for rehabilitation and for effectively accomplishing the purposes of the juvenile justice system, which, again, are not to punish children for criminal wrongdoing, but to remediate their delinquent behavior so that when they come out and come back to see you in society, maybe they'll be working at a job instead of breaking into your car.
Right. Let's go to Johnny. Hi, Johnny. Good morning.
Hello.
Hey, Johnny. Go ahead.
Hey, one of the things I heard y'all talk about earlier was rehabilitation. And, I spent 20 years in prison. I got out January 8th of this year. And, these guys talk about the juvenile system. I watched the Woodland Hills. After all that went down, we went over there because I worked for maintenance, and we actually worked on the facility over there. There's no rehabilitation for these kids, and there's no rehabilitation for actual grown-up inmates. Like they did a story about inmates getting killed at River Bend, and you never heard nothing else about it. There's just no rehabilitation for these kids.
That's what we need. Yeah, you're right. And that's why the system is broken.
These two guys sitting here, they never been over there and actually sat down and had a group meeting with these kids to find out what actually goes on, and the rehabilitation is just not there.
Yeah.
And that's what we need, and there has to be a political incentive for the Tennessee legislature to take appropriate action to address this, and that's going to take money.
Well, yeah, it will. And what's interesting, and we should say Woodland Hills is now closed, is my understanding. And so as a result of that, there's fewer beds. And that's one explanation. But so what's interesting is, the political will has to come into play for more money. So what you have are the constituents. If they put the pressure on the lawmakers, but the constituents seem to focus on punishment. And I get it. I understand. People are tired of getting carjacked and all of this. But they focus on that. If the constituents would focus on, listen, all right, we want them locked up, we want them rehabilitated so when they come out they don't commit crimes, and put pressure on lawmakers are going to do what their constituents say, period. That's how politicians are.
Right.
And if they can get away with, I'm law and order, I'm going to lock up all those bad kids, you'll never see them again, which is not true, you will, they're not going to feel the will. It's not going to change. It's just not going to change.
And what we have here is the result of decades of this policy being implemented. You are seeing the fruits of the current policy of punishment first, which has evolved some, but it has been and continues to be a very punitive system despite the Tennessee statutory directive that the juvenile justice system be for rehabilitation. We have the opportunity to address that with effective measures. You reap what you sow, and we're reaping that right now with juvenile crime that's not being effectively mitigated. So,
yeah, if we're all tired of juvenile crime and it's reaching this critical point, this is one of those areas we need to address. And I think it's amazing that there is not, they tried to pass a law in the legislature last year that would ban solitary confinement for juveniles, and that law didn't pass. And one reason was concern about would some facilities be immediately out of compliance? And so, and that's money then, because if they're out of compliance, then we got to build new
There was a
ones.
price tag attached to it, and so I'm guessing the lawmakers weren't willing to commit to. That's the first thing everyone looks at on Capitol Hill is what's the cost going to be of this bill, and they, I'm guessing that
that was an initial problem with the bill, that there was a large fiscal note put on it.
This is going to cost money one way or the other, but it's like you pay them now or later because it's getting worse.
that's right, and not included in that fiscal note is the cost to Tennessee citizens of the continued violent and property crime that is committed by children who don't receive treatment as they should in these facilities. So that cost should be factored into the equation as well. The cost of doing business as usual is going to continue to provide the results we see now.
Yeah, I think, I know plenty of people, you probably do too. We all probably know someone that's been a victim of juvenile crime. I'm serious. If you don't, then consider yourself lucky.
Right.
I have friends, reporter in our newsroom had his car broken into over the weekend. So listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, more of your calls and more of your comments on Facebook in our final segment with our guests right after this.